Since the 1970s, drug trafficking organizations have gained immense power, crippling economies and devastating lives. However, within the shadowy hierarchy of these criminal empires, some cartels have strived for similar power but failed for the most absurd reasons. So here are 10 cartels that failed, and why. In 2024, the name Norte de Valle Cartel or North Valley Cartel might not ring any bells, but 40 years ago, that was a different story. Formed in the 80s, the North Valley Cartel, aka NDVC, emerged from the breakup of the infamous Cali Cartel and had prospects of becoming one of the wealthiest and most powerful cartels of its time. Now, many of its members were former police officers who had close ties to Colombian security forces. It was initially led by former policeman Orlando Henao Montoya, alias El Hombre del Overol. Henao surrendered to the Colombian authorities in 1997, but continued to operate from prison, launching attacks against the remnants of the Cali Cartel and NDVC associates who were cooperating with U.S. authorities. By 1998, Henao was murdered in prison in retaliation for a hit on Cali Cartel chief Elmer Pacho Herrera, supposedly due to concerns that he was cooperating with the DEA. But that wouldn't necessarily crumble the cartel, as it was reorganized by Wilber Varela, alias Jabon, another ex-policeman who had been in charge of the organization's assassin squad. So with the support of Loreno Henao Montoya, the sister of Henao, and then wife of imprisoned NDVC leader Ivan Ordenola, the cartel was back in operation, trying to find its footing in Colombia's narcotics underworld. They operated primarily in the northern part of Valle de Cauca, a western province of Colombia that includes the city of Cali and the port of Buenaventura, which is a key dispatch point for drugs leaving the country for the U.S. They had the money, the manpower, and the product. So why exactly did they fail? Well, one word: greed. Now, Jabon and Don Diego, another drug kingpin within the cartel, fought for the overall leadership of the organization, leading the cartel to split into two factions. The civil war between these factions was so bloody, it claimed the lives of over 1,000 people between 2003 and 2004 alone. Some members would flee the cartel, while others, like Victor Patiño Fomeque, alias El Quimico, met with the DEA to negotiate their surrender. And by 2007, this war came to an end when Don Diego was finally captured and extradited to the U.S. As for Jabon, he was taken out that following year by his own deputy, Luis Enrique Calle Serna, who went on to assume control of the cartel, but renamed it into the Independent Rastrojos. Nonetheless, the downfall of that cartel was already in full swing, and now with this new leadership, they were lacking both manpower and resources to stand as its own organization. And by 2010, virtually the entire leadership structure had been extradited or murdered. La Resistencia isn't widely recognized as a bona fide cartel in Mexico, but their fall from grace was destined right from the moment they were created. In 2010, La Resistencia was founded by the Sinaloa leader Ignacio Coronel Villarreal, after the Zetas, a rival cartel, began encroaching in Michoacan, fighting off Sinaloa sicarios to gain drug trafficking corridors in the area. And originally, the resistance was composed of gunmen from the Milenio cartel, which was loyal to the Sinaloa cartel. They were also supported by local Michoacan cartel, La Familia Michoacana, aiding to fight against Los Zetas and the Beltran-Leyva cartel. However, when La Familia and Beltran-Leyva got destroyed and dismantled by Mexican federal security forces, the Milenio cartel merged fully with the Sinaloa cartel, while the resistance was left to continue its violent campaign against Los Zetas by joining forces with the Sinaloa, Gulf, La Familia, and Knights Templar cartels. I mean, just imagine sicarios from all four formidable cartels embodied in one organization, pushing to achieve the same goal. La Resistencia was unbreakable. They had the most elite squad of fighters in the region at that time. They dominated Michoacan and reigned unchallenged, until one organization rose up from the shadows to completely obliterate them. This criminal empire shocked Mexico and the world with its supreme and stealthy operations, which was led by arguably the most dangerous drug trafficker in the world, El Mencho. With the capture of Oscar Nava Valencia, leader of the Milenio cartel, and the death of Ignacio Coronel Villarreal of Sinaloa, the Milenio cartel broke into many factions, with members of the resistance fleeing to join the neighboring Jalisco New Generation cartel, or CJNG, which was and still is headed by Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, aka El Mencho. Now, Mencho noticed a slight shake in the resistance structure, so he seized the opportunity to cripple them completely. Capitalizing on that collapse, he began vying for control of the region with relentless ambition. He utilized every artillery in his possession, wiping out their leaders one by one until they were so broken, all that was left of that organization was swept away by Mexican authorities. On March 1, 2011, federal police arrested Victor Manuel Torres Garcia, alias El Papirin, who was said to be the leader of the resistance. Then just 5 months later, La Resistencia's commander, Neri Salgado Harrison, was also arrested in Michoacan by Mexican federal police. By 2012, almost all the leaders had been arrested by Mexican authorities or mutilated by military wings of the CJNG. The remaining La Resistencia members who managed to escape the massacre formed alliances with Los Viagras and remnants of the Familia Michoacana cartel. Yet the CJNG till today still tramples on them and their operations. Many people believe that the Guadalajara cartel is Mexico's oldest drug trafficking organization, but some books of history dispute that. According to the DEA, the Sonora cartel is one of the earliest cartels to begin shipping cocaine from Colombia, particularly from the Cali cartel into Mexico. Now, they were involved in the cultivation and distribution of marijuana and cocaine, but as time went on, they dipped their toes into methamphetamine. They operated out of northern central Mexico and were believed to smuggle drugs into Arizona, Texas, and California from a network of ranches along the northern border region where drugs are stored prior to shipment. Now, the Sonora cartel has been specifically linked to operating out of Hermosillo and Agua Prieta in Sonora, but also less so in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Culiacán, Sinaloa, and the states of Nayarit and Durango. So, having been in this business for so many years, where did they get it all wrong? Well, I guess the easiest answer to that question would be poor leadership. Miguel and Rafael Caro Quintero, the infamous brothers from Caborca, Sonora, have left indelible marks on drug trafficking. Miguel, born in 1963, was first arrested in 1992 for tax evasion, but was acquitted, allegedly due to threats and bribes. Now, despite being imprisoned for racketeering, drug smuggling, and money laundering, he reportedly continued to run the Sonora cartel from behind bars. Though it wasn't for long. By 2001, Miguel was arrested again, even after he claimed the DEA was using him to get his brother, who was involved in the death of Special Agent Enrique Camarena. And speaking of Miguel's brother, Rafael Caro Quintero, the co-founder of Guadalajara and Sonora cartels, he was pretty notorious for many things, except for being a quitter. Now, he got arrested in Costa Rica back in 1985 for the brutal murder of Camarena, and was subsequently charged with racketeering, drug trafficking, and multiple violent crimes. These two violent brothers led the Sonora cartel for years, but once they got arrested, the cartel's doom was inevitable. By 2007, most of the members had fled to join other prominent cartels, but due to their strong ties within the operation routes in Texas, the cartel was acquired by El Chapo and his associates at Sinaloa. March 2017, the Mexican government deployed hundreds of forces to combat the opium plantation by cartels in the state of Oaxaca. These plantations, hidden away in mountainous terrain and impoverished villages, have caused a war between drug traffickers and Mexico's armed forces. Now, the cartel behind these plantations and other drug trafficking in the area isn't the Oaxaca cartel, but the people they now work for. You see, back in the 80s, the Oaxaca cartel was one of the smallest cartels operating out of Mexico. They typically dealt on marijuana and cocaine trafficking, operating out of southern Mexico, particularly in the states of Oaxaca and Chiapas. Pedro Diaz Prada, Eviano Jesus, and Domingo Aniceto were the first leaders of this notorious cartel. But in this group, Pedro was the most cold-hearted killer. Pedro started his criminal career in the 70s, cultivating marijuana in San Pedro Totolapa, Oaxaca. He would expand into cocaine trafficking using speedboats and light aircraft after the style got popularized by Pablo Escobar. However, he was arrested in 1985 and given 33 years in prison, but being the notorious menace he was, Pedro found a way to escape from the Santa Maria Ixcotel prison, and 2 years later, ruthlessly assassinated the judge who sentenced him, Judge Pedro Villafuerte Gallegos. In 1990, Pedro was captured but managed another daring escape 2 years later from Reclusorio Oriente prison in Mexico City. But by the time he reunited with his cartel, things weren't the same anymore. They had formed an alliance with the Tijuana Cartel, and even though Pedro became their key representative in southeastern Mexico, things still wouldn't go his way. The men he trusted weren't there anymore, and working under the Tijuana cartel didn't give him the flexibility to carry out orders like he used to. This ultimately led to his third arrest in 2007, after Mexican authorities busted him carrying drugs and weapons in his vehicle. Third time's the charm for Mexican authorities, as Pedro just couldn't find any more ways to escape. And conversely, his capture marked the beginning of the end for the Oaxaca cartel. They got fully incorporated into Tijuana, but as the cartel faced resistance from CJNG and Sinaloa, who encroached onto their territories, they got weak and eventually disintegrated. Now, is it safe to say Pedro's absence led to their failure? Absolutely not. We believe the Oaxaca cartel lost its balance because they never really established their trafficking points from day one. While they started off with marijuana and coke like we already said, other drug traffickers said that their land was more useful for opium plantations, and besides, their geographical location hindered from gaining direct links to bigger markets in the narcotics underworld. They were always a small cartel in Mexico's hierarchy, and bad decisions made them even smaller. Oh, and as for Pedro Diaz-Prada, he was released in 2019 to serve the remainder of his sentence under house arrest due to his deteriorating health. Now, what happens when paramilitary groups come together to form a drug trafficking organization? These guys are combat soldiers possessing military-grade weapons and have the manpower to stand in battle. It shouldn't be that hard to dominate the narcotics game, right? Well, that's completely wrong. What I just described to you was the Bloque Meta drug trafficking organization in Colombia, and despite the mountain of skills and resources they possessed, they just couldn't find a breakthrough in the market. They were essentially a Colombian drug trafficking neo-paramilitary organization engaged in the Colombian armed conflict, and their history can be traced back to the United Self-Defense Forces of Colombia, or AUC. Now, when the AUC demobilized in 2006, many members of that organization had formed AIRPAC, or ERPAC, which would later partly become the Bloque Meta, to continue the counter-revolutionary struggle against the FARC or FARC in Colombia's eastern plains. And at the time, the Bloque Meta was considered Colombia's most brutal drug trafficking organization of this second generation. The group had just over 250 members, but they were ruthless killers who did anything to accomplish their missions. However, it wasn't just Bloque Meta that came out of AUC. Another group, Libertadores del Vachada, was also formed. And let's just say they were the major catalyst behind the failure of Bloque Meta. Both factions, having once been united and had received the same training and tactics, would fight over control of drug trafficking in the Eastern Meta Department. The leader of the Bloque Meta, alias Orozco, claimed that the struggle against Libertadores del Vachada was political and not about drug trafficking. Now, after the capture of criminals such as El Loco Barrera and Jonantan, in addition to the death of a major Bloque Meta leader, Pijarvi, the two factions were in the hands of the drug trafficker Mauricio Pachon Rozo, aka Puntilla. He decided to reunite the group, marking the second mistake that led to their total downfall. Puntilla would give them a new name, Los Puntilleros, with a base of operations out of the eastern plains of Colombia. And with the new group now united, it was easier for Colombian authorities to target them as a piece. Every leader under the organization was fished out, with the final one, Arnulfo Hernandez Guzman, also known as Tigre, getting captured in late 2017. At this point, members of the Bloque Meta, or as they're now calling themselves, Los Puntilleros, were barely up to 100, leading to the Colombian Ministry of Defense to deem it as no longer being a threat to the country. If there was ever any cartel that could rival the notorious reign of Pablo Escobar, it would have undoubtedly been the Cali Cartel. Now, they were once the dominant force in the global drug trade. They emerged out of the 70s and swiftly grew into one of the most powerful and sophisticated criminal organizations in the world. Founded by brothers Gilberto and Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela, alongside Jose Santa Cruz Londoño, the Cali Cartel established their presence through a combination of strategic alliances, ruthless tactics, and a pretty genius way to smuggle cocaine anywhere around the world. But the question is still lingering out there: if they were such geniuses, how did they fail? To uncover that answer, we gotta trace back to the very origins of this formidable criminal empire. Now, the Cali cartel had always existed in Colombia, but their dominant rise began after the decline of their rivals, the Medellin cartel. Unlike Escobar and his associates, the Cali bosses maintained a low profile, favoring bribery and strategic alliances over violence. Now, this strategy earned them the moniker, the Gentlemen of Cali. They would establish a network spanning multiple continents, utilizing sophisticated methods to transport cocaine into the US and Europe. They were meticulous in planning, using legitimate businesses as fronts, including real estate pharmacies and even a soccer team, América de Cali. By the 1980s, the Cali cartel controlled over 80% of the world's cocaine market. Their reach extended beyond Colombia, with major distribution networks in the US, Mexico, with the Guadalajara cartel, Europe, and Asia. Around this time, the DEA had caught on to their smuggling methods with planes and speedboats, so they introduced a new method called liquid cocaine, which would involve mixing this coke with a certain liquid to be injected intravenously. This form of coke was easily concealed in bottles of wine and shipments hidden in hollowed-out concrete posts. At their peak, they were raking in billions annually. They would function as a federation of semi-autonomous cells, with each responsible for a specific asset of the business, from production to distribution. The decentralization made it difficult for law enforcement to dismantle the entire network, as capturing one cell didn't necessarily compromise the others. Now, we gotta say, that's pretty genius. However, as brilliant as they were, the Cali cartel's reign wasn't destined to last. 1995. After this intensified effort by both Colombian and U.S. authorities to dismantle the cartel, one special operation known as Operation Cornerstone led to the arrests of key figures, including the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers and Jose Santa Cruz Lodoño. These arrests were a significant blow, as these guys were instrumental in the cartel's operations. Gilberto was arrested in June 1995, followed by Miguel in August of the same year. Santa Cruz managed to escape prison in January 1996, but was killed by Colombian police later that year. Now, the removal of these three figures weakened the cartel's structure and operations, but that wasn't even the end of it. In 2006, the Cali cartel was hit with its final blow when the Orejuela brothers were extradited to the U.S. Each brother got a 30-year prison sentence after they both pled guilty to the drug trafficking charges, and for some reason, no one else stepped up to take control of the cartel. Maybe no one wanted it, since the past decade had been disastrous for the whole of Colombia. So with the founders gone, the remnant members fizzled out into smaller groups that no one has really heard of ever since. So if there's one cartel in history truly withstanding the test of time, it's gotta be the Beltran-Leyva organization, aka the BLO. Now, even though they fragmented into smaller groups, they certainly didn't go down without putting up an epic fight. Led by the four Beltran-Leyva brothers, this Mexican drug trafficking organization was the pioneer of the illicit drug trade in Mexico. The brothers began their criminal career working for Amado Carrillo Fuentes, who employed them as hitmen and transporters. Carrillo Fuentes ran the powerful Juarez cartel, which established drug trafficking from the north of Colombia into the U.S. Like their boss, the brothers were ruthless and ambitious. It was also around that time that they created a strong relationship with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, but it would be this relationship that would later contribute to their eventual fall. In 2004, Amado Carrillo Fuentes' brother, Rodolfo, killed two of Guzman's operatives in Ciudad Juarez, leading El Chapo to order his assassination. That sparked outrage amongst the Beltran-Leyva brothers, as El Chapo's actions were pretty treacherous. At the time, the BLO clan was influential. Their public profile steadily rose, as did their public appearances in extravagant parties in places like Cuernavaca, where their domain was undisputed. Their allies over at Sinaloa, meanwhile, appeared troubled. Added to this tension was a distribution route in Chicago being disputed. Tension boiled over even more when authorities got Alfredo Beltran-Leyva on January 21, 2008. But after authorities released Guzman's son, Ivan Archibaldo, from jail on a technicality, Arturo Beltran-Leyva's fears were confirmed. Guzman had provided the information leading to the arrest of his younger brother, Alfredo. War was declared, and one of the first victims was Edgar Guzman, Joaquin's son, who was killed when he left a Sinaloa shopping center with his bodyguards. After this, the increased levels of bloodshed in Sinaloa were unimaginable. The BLO would ally with the Zetas, while the Sinaloa was reaching out to the Gulf Cartel and Familia Michoacana. that ruthless group that bursted onto the scene in 2006. It was the ultimate showdown, a battle like never seen before. Throughout, Guzman, Zambada, and Esparragoza remained aligned against the BLO, and using their contacts in the federal government, the Sinaloa cartel wore down the BLO. Dozens of operatives were arrested and/or killed, and in December 2009, Mexican Marines killed Arturo Beltran-Leyva after he barricaded himself in an apartment in this upscale neighborhood in Cuernavaca. The year 2010 was even worse for the BLO. Following the death of Arturo, Valdez Villarreal split to form his own organization. Hector Beltran-Leyva regrouped with the remaining of BLO and began calling his operation the South Pacific Cartel. However, battles between the two factions left both vulnerable. Carlos Beltran-Leyva was arrested, with remnants of the BLO strengthening their alliance with the Zetas in order to stay afloat. As of right now, the main BLO splinter groups are the Guerreros Unidos and Los Rojos. Both the groups are linked to high levels of violence in the state of Guerrero and Morelos. And while they're still pretty active, the BLO in general is considered dead. The Knights Templar Cartel, or Los Caballeros Templarios, emerged from the splintering of La Familia Michoacana. They formed in 2010 by former La Familia members, including guys like Servando La Tuta Gomez Martinez and Nazario El Chayo Moreno Gonzalez. The Knights Templar quickly carved out a reputation for brutality and ideological fanaticism, blended with crime and some pseudo-religious BS. At the height of its power, the Knights Templar exerted significant control over the state of Michoacan and some other regions. They monopolized on methamphetamine, extorted local businesses, and infiltrated various aspects of society, including local law enforcement and political structures. The cartel would justify their actions with some bizarre code of conduct, portraying themselves as protectors of the people while engaging in these rampant, violent, and corrupted acts. They claimed to defend the region from other criminal groups and enforce a moral code, often accompanied by some religious and historical rhetoric reminiscent of some medieval knights. However, their aggressive expansion and violence caught the eyes of both the Mexican government and local communities. By 2013, self-defense groups, or autodefensas, began forming around Michoacan, composed of local residents fed up with the cartel's reign of terror. These groups, often armed and organized, would challenge the Knights and disrupt their operations, all the while gaining support from the federal government. But their real downfall would come in 2014 with the deaths of key leaders. Nazario Moreno, who was presumed dead in 2010 but later found to be alive, was killed in a confrontation with Mexican authorities, and Servando Gomez, who was captured in 2015. And with these two gone now, it significantly would weaken the cartel's leadership structure. The government would intensify crackdowns, combined with the persistent resistance from those self-defense groups, leading to this dramatic decline of the Templars' power and influence. By the mid-2010s, the Knights Templar were severely fragmented, with many members either arrested, killed, or absorbed by other criminal organizations. Now, the group's infrastructure and operational capacity was also dismantled, and their control over Michoacan eroded. We might see remnants still existing today, but their influence has been drastically reduced, marking a significant fall from their former dominance. Now, the La Familia Michoacana cartel didn't exactly fail, but their wave of dominance faded as quickly as it surged. November 2010, narco banners were hung over bridges in the western state of Michoacan. It would state that the La Familia cartel was disbanding after getting plunged from all corners by an elite tag team operation featuring Mexican Special Forces and the DEA. Now, just a few years before that happened, La Familia stormed into Mexico's narcotics underworld around 2004. They started off as allies with the Gulf Cartel, as part of Los Zetas, but by 2006, they split off and created their own organization, focusing solely on the production and distribution of meth. They gained wider notoriety that same year, when La Familia gunmen rolled 5 heads onto the dance floor of a Michoacan disco, with a note claiming, "This is divine justice." These guys tortured or killed you if you got in their way, while also building a base in the Mexican state of Michoacan. But here's the thing, La Familia, unlike other veteran-dominant narco groups like Sinaloa, outdid itself by trying to be more than just a meth mafia. Its leader, Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, alias El Mas Loco, wasn't just a drug lord. This guy was a Christian narco-evangelical who wrote his own Bible, which he forced all 1,500+ plus members to read. This guy thought he was the patriotic defender of Michoacan in Mexico, while claiming that they had the right to eliminate their enemies. Even more disturbing would be that he recruited sicarios from religious-based rehab clinics and compelled them to attend his church, while forbidding them from taking alcohol and drugs. At the height of their operations, they had tortured and murdered 12 Mexican federal police agents who were investigating crime in Michoacan. They would dump their bodies alongside a mountain highway with a message reading, "So that you come for another, we'll be waiting for you here." This pushed Mexican authorities and the US government to launch 2 separate operations to bring down this cartel. When most of their members got taken out, the cartel tried to strike a peace treaty with the Mexican president, but that didn't work out. El Mas Loco also got killed, along with his absurd religious beliefs, making the cartel split into 2 factions. Right now, there are claims that the cartel might be coming back together, but we doubt that the Mexican government really cares. We've heard story after story about the Medellin cartel and their infamous association with one of the most notorious drug lords in history, Pablo Escobar, but at their peak they were the most powerful cartel in the world, a real significant threat to the US government. So, did the death of Pablo Escobar truly mark the beginning of their downfall? We can go back to a small-time cocaine trafficking operation in the 1970s. Now, things would kick off when Escobar and his associates, including the Ochoa brothers and Carlos Leder, consolidated their power to make the Medellin cartel become a dominant force. They pioneered a large-scale cocaine production and distribution, establishing a lucrative pipeline from Colombia to the US and Europe. At its peak, this cartel was making up to $60 million daily, while controlling over 80% of the global cocaine market. And as they flooded households with cocaine and narcotics, they didn't think twice when it came to taking a life. One of the most craziest things to come out of that cartel's reign was the bombing of the Avianca Flight 203 in 1989. In a bid to eliminate a potential informant, the cartel planted a bomb on that commercial flight and killed all 107 people on board. That act of terrorism not only highlighted their willingness to engage in extreme acts of violence and indiscriminate killing, but also their determination to maintain their grip on power. They didn't care how many lives were lost or how many cities they had to burn, as long as their goals were achieved. Now, the crazy part here is their operations weren't even limited to drug trafficking. Pablo and his boys engaged in a range of criminal activities like extortion, money laundering, kidnapping, etc. They used their immense wealth to buy off politicians, law enforcement, judicial officials, really effectively creating a parallel state within Colombia. Escobar's influence was so pervasive that he ran for and briefly held a seat in the Colombian Congress, leveraging that position to push policies favorable to his interests. And if they allowed it, Escobar could have really been the president of the country. Just imagine what that would have looked like. On the flip side though, the Colombian government, with substantial support from the US, would launch this aggressive campaign to dismantle Escobar's power and cartel. That would include forming a specialized police and military unit, as well as deploying a bunch of cool spy stuff. Additionally, rival cartels and even vigilante groups like Los Pepes would target the Medellin cartel, leading to this all-out war in the streets of Colombia. So how exactly did they fall? Well, the fall of the Medellin cartel began in earnest in the early 1990s. Key members were captured or killed, and the vast drug empire started to crumble. But that significant blow came in '93 when Pablo was tracked down and killed by Colombian National Police, with assistance from the US. His death marked the definitive end of the Medellin cartel, although remnants of his network continued to operate in a diminished capacity. But in the end, Escobar's death was paradoxical. To some, he was a hero who helped the poor, while to others, he was a villain whose death brought relief. Could you imagine the level of power Escobar and his associates could have if they were still alive in 2024? With the rise of artificial intelligence and rapidly advancing technology, his notorious cunning combined with today's digital tools could have created an even more formidable criminal empire that would have definitely changed the face of global crime.